The rain came down in cold, relentless sheets, turning Route 59 into a black mirror that swallowed the amber glow of the streetlights. It was the kind of night that made even the most careful driver grip the wheel a little tighter. At 11:31 p.m., the dashboard clock in the midnight blue sedan read the hour in soft blue digits. Justice Elijah R. Thornton adjusted the collar of his tuxedo and felt the long evening settle into his bones like damp cold. He was 62, a man whose face carried the quiet map of a life spent arguing for the marginalized in his 20s and ruling on the hard cases from the Illinois Supreme Court bench in his 50s and 60s. Tonight had been the State Bar Association Gala in Chicago. He had given the keynote, his deep, measured voice filling the ballroom as he spoke about the necessity of blind justice in a country that seemed to be forgetting what the blindfold meant. The applause had been warm. The handshakes had been endless. Now all he wanted was the quiet of his home in Hinsdale, a cup of decaf, and Vivian's steady presence. Thornton drove exactly at the posted limit. 4 decades of living inside the law had made that automatic. He did not see the cruiser until its headlights bloomed in the rearview mirror, closing fast. The vehicle accelerated hard, riding his bumper for a dangerous second before the red and blue strobes exploded across the wet glass and the siren tore through the rain. Thornton exhaled once, signaled right, and guided the sedan onto the gravel shoulder. He killed the engine, rolled the window down halfway, and placed both hands flat on the wheel where they could be seen. It was an old habit, older than his robes. The cruiser door opened. Officer Shane P. McAllister stepped into the downpour. He was stocky, broad through the shoulders, early 30s, high and tight haircut, tactical vest cinched tight across his chest like armor. McAllister had a reputation in the 42nd Precinct for turning small stops into big problems and for seeing the wrong kind of driver in the wrong kind of neighborhood after dark. He took his time walking forward, flashlight already in his hand, slapping it against his thigh in a steady, menacing rhythm. When he reached the sedan, he slapped the trunk hard enough to rock the car, then stood tall at the driver's window and drilled the beam straight into Thornton's eyes. "License, registration, proof of insurance," McAllister barked. The tone was not a request. It was a challenge. "The light is bright, officer," Thornton said, his courtroom baritone calm and even. "Could you lower it so I can see you?" "I don't take requests," McAllister snapped. "License and registration, now." Thornton told him exactly where the documents were and moved slowly, as instructed. He handed them over. McAllister read the name and felt nothing. To him, the man in the tuxedo was simply an older black man in an expensive car on a road where he had no business being at this hour. "Thornton," McAllister said, deliberately using the last name like a weapon. "You know why I stopped you? I do not. You swerved, crossed the double yellow. Smells like you've been drinking. I was at a professional dinner, sparkling water only. I did not cross the line. Don't argue with me." McAllister leaned down, shining the light into the back seat. "People who aren't drinking don't swerve. Step out of the vehicle." Thornton felt the first cold thread of real danger. "Officer, I respectfully decline. There is no probable cause for this stop, and no reasonable suspicion of DUI. I have given you my identification. If you intend to issue a citation, please do so." McAllister's face flushed. The vein at his temple pulsed. He was used to fear. Defiance from someone he had already decided was beneath him lit a fuse. "I am giving you a lawful order to exit the vehicle," he shouted, yanking the handle. The door stayed locked. "Open this door, or I will smash the window and drag you out by your neck." Thornton unlocked the doors. "I am stepping out," he said, voice steady and edged with steel. "But mark my words, officer, this is an unlawful detention." He pushed the door open and rose to his full height. Even soaked and standing on the shoulder of Route 59, he carried the quiet gravity of a man who had spent decades commanding courtrooms. McAllister did not hesitate. He grabbed Thornton by the shoulder, spun him, and slammed him chest first against the wet metal of the sedan. "Spread your legs!" The kick to the ankles was unnecessary and vicious. Rain poured down Thornton's face and soaked through the tuxedo. The cuffs went on too tight, ratcheting until the steel bit deep into skin and circulation faltered. "You're under arrest," McAllister said, triumphant. "On what charge?" "Suspicion of DUI, resisting arrest, and failure to obey a lawful order." The ride to the 42nd Precinct in Aurora was psychological warfare. Every pothole sent fire up Thornton's arms. McAllister talked the entire way. "Think you're special because of that fancy suit? That car? Out here I'm the law. You don't get to talk back to me." Thornton said nothing. He memorized the time, the badge number he had glimpsed, every word, every threat. He was no longer just a man in handcuffs. He was a sitting justice, building an airtight record in his head. At the precinct, the booking area smelled of old coffee, disinfectant, and fear. Sergeant Roy T. Ellison looked up from the elevated desk, took in the tuxedo, the rain-soaked shoes, the calm dignity, and felt something shift in his gut. This did not feel like a standard DUI. Thornton stood straight. "This officer assaulted me, restrained me without cause, and fabricated charges because I questioned the legality of the stop." McAllister scoffed. Ellison studied the bruised, swelling wrists and ordered the cuffs loosened. Thornton was processed as attorney, not justice. He had made the deliberate choice not to use his title. He wanted to see exactly how deep the rot went when no one knew who he was. They put him in holding cell 3. The concrete bench was cold. The air tasted of metal and urine. 28 minutes passed in shivering silence. Then a younger officer, Jenkins, opened the door and offered the phone call. Thornton did not call Vivian. He did not want her driving through this storm in the middle of the night. He dialed the private number of Governor Benjamin Ben Caldwell, his old law school friend. The governor's voice went from sleep-thick to razor-sharp in seconds. "Christian, Elijah," Thornton corrected quietly. "I am in holding cell 3 at the 42nd Precinct in Aurora. An officer named Shane McAllister pulled me over without cause, assaulted me, and arrested me on fabricated charges. I did not tell them who I am. I wanted to see how they treat an ordinary citizen." There was a long silence, then the sound of movement. "Are you injured?" "Bruised wrists, strained shoulder. Nothing broken. But the culture here is toxic, Ben." "Stay exactly where you are," Caldwell said, voice low and lethal. "Do not say another word to anyone. I am on my way. 12 minutes. The line went dead. At 12:58 a.m., the precinct doors burst open. Wind and rain howled in behind a phalanx of state police troopers in tactical gear, led by Agent Philip Tanner. The governor strode in wearing a dark wool overcoat, rain glittering on his shoulders, face set in absolute fury. Chief of Staff Andrew Ramsey and Attorney General Rebecca S. Holt flanked him. Governor Caldwell walked straight to the booking desk. 15 minutes ago, a man was dragged into this building. His name is Elijah Thornton. Where is he?" McAllister, still riding the high of his arrest, stepped forward with a smirk. "You mean the DUI in cell 3? Yeah, he's back there, got combative. I had to restrain him. With all due respect, Governor, I don't care who he knows. He broke the law." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Captain Leonard J. Briggs appeared from the back, still buttoning his shirt, and went pale when he saw the governor. Caldwell turned slowly to McAllister. "You brought him in?" "Yes, sir." "Captain Briggs, get your keys. We are going to holding cell 3. And you," Caldwell pointed at McAllister, "are walking in front of me." The walk down the cinder-block corridor felt like a death march. When the cell door opened, Thornton sat perfectly upright on the bench, tuxedo ruined, wrists raw and bleeding, but spine straight and eyes clear. "Ben," he said quietly, "you made good time." Caldwell stepped inside, took one look at the bruises, and the last thread of his restraint snapped. "Captain Briggs," he said, voice ringing like a gavel, "allow me to introduce the man your officer just assaulted and falsely imprisoned. This is the Honorable Elijah R. Thornton, Senior Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court." The words landed like hammer blows. Briggs staggered. McAllister's face went corpse white. His mouth opened and closed without sound. Thornton rose and stepped into the corridor light. He looked directly at McAllister. "I am an attorney, officer, and I am a citizen of this state. My title should not be the price of basic dignity and constitutional protection. If I had told you who I was, you would have let me go. What happens to the man who has no robe to hide behind?" He took one step closer. McAllister shrank back against the wall. "You fabricated a traffic violation. You assaulted an unarmed, compliant man. You tightened these cuffs with the clear intent to cause pain. You did it not because I broke the law, but because I bruised your ego." Governor Caldwell turned to Agent Tanner. "Disarm him, badge and weapon, now. Place him in cell 4. He does not leave this building. Captain Briggs, every dash cam, body cam, and audio recording from this precinct is to be secured and delivered to the Attorney General within 5 minutes. If anything is missing, you will be charged with obstruction. The entire shift on duty tonight, including Sergeant Ellison, is suspended without pay pending a full independent investigation. The Department of Justice will be taking a very close look at this precinct." McAllister's hands shook so badly he could barely unbuckle his gun belt. The clatter of equipment hitting the floor echoed down the hallway. He was shoved into the adjacent cell. The door slammed with the same final sound he had given Thornton an hour earlier. Thornton turned to the governor. "I would like to go home now, Ben. Vivian will be worried. Of course, my detail will take you, but this is not over." "No," Thornton agreed, glancing once at the cell holding McAllister. "It is only beginning." The armored SUV carried him through the rain-slicked streets to Hinsdale. It was just after 2:15 a.m. when Vivian opened the front door. She saw the bruises, the ruined tuxedo, the exhaustion in his eyes, and simply took his hand. She led him to the kitchen, cleaned the lacerations with steady fingers, and listened while the stoic mask finally cracked. "I have spent 40 years believing the system, however flawed, could be bent toward justice," he whispered, watching the water in the basin turn pink. "Tonight, I saw the beast wearing a badge. He did not see a citizen. He saw a target." Vivian wrapped the bandage with gentle pressure. "Then the target," she said quietly, "is going to dismantle the beast." By morning, the political earthquake had already begun. The Union moved fast. At 8:47 a.m., Union President Michael "Mike" Donnelly stood on the steps of the DuPage County Courthouse in Wheaton, flanked by stone-faced officers in dress blues, and spun a story of a combative, swerving driver who had forced a heroic officer to defend himself. Watching from his chambers, Thornton turned off the television. The old playbook: blame the victim, claim fear for the officer's life, bury the truth in procedure. He picked up the phone and asked his clerk to send in Special Agent Howard J. Klein of the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Klein sat across from him, grim. Dash cam and body cam were conveniently off or malfunctioning. "It is going to be he said, she said." Thornton opened his desk drawer and slid a small, encrypted thumb drive across the polished wood. "My vehicle is a state-issued judicial transport. After a credible threat 3 years ago, The governor's office equipped it with a military-grade 360-degree security suite, cameras and parabolic microphones that upload automatically to a secure state police server. What McAllister failed to realize is that he performed for an audience he could not see. Klein stared at the drive as if it were a live grenade. "You have the entire stop," Thornton said softly. "Every word, every blow, in high definition. Let Mr. Donnelly spin that." Nearly 4 months later, the federal courtroom in downtown Chicago was packed. On one side sat rows of off-duty officers in stony silence. On the other, civil rights advocates, politicians, and citizens who had come to watch power meet accountability. Officer Shane P. McAllister sat at the defense table, shrunken inside a suit that no longer fit. He faced federal charges of deprivation of rights under color of law, aggravated battery, and false imprisonment, up to 20 years if convicted. Sergeant Roy T. Ellison took the stand and broke the blue wall with quiet, devastating clarity. "I took an oath to protect the public, not a gang," he said, looking straight at McAllister. "I saw Justice Thornton's wrists that night. I heard the bragging. He did not arrest a drunk driver. He kidnapped a man because his authority was questioned. If I stay silent now, the badge means nothing." When the prosecutor called "The Honorable Elijah R. Thornton," the room went utterly still. Thornton walked to the witness box in a simple charcoal suit. He swore on the Bible, voice clear and strong. He recounted the night with surgical precision. Then the interior cabin video filled the massive screen. The jury watched a calm, compliant man hand over his license. They heard McAllister's escalating hostility. They saw the violent, unprovoked assault, the cuffs ratcheting too tight, heard the taunt, "You'll talk when we get to lockup. Guys like you always break down when you realize nobody cares about your rights once you're behind bars." When the video ended, the silence was suffocating. On cross-examination, the defense lawyer tried one last desperate line. "You admit you refused the initial order to exit the vehicle." "I declined an unlawful order that lacked probable cause," Thornton answered, leaning forward. "A badge does not grant any officer the power to suspend the Fourth Amendment on a whim. The law requires a reason. Officer McAllister had none. He had only malice." He looked at the jury, then at McAllister. "The side of the road is not a courtroom," Thornton said, voice dropping into the register that had once silenced appellate panels. "But it is exactly where constitutional rights are either upheld or violently extinguished. I survived that night because I am privileged, because I have a title, because I have the governor's private number. But as I sat in that freezing cell with my wrists bleeding, I was not thinking of myself. I was thinking of the young man coming home from a late factory shift who has no cameras in his car. I was thinking of the mother driving her sick child to the hospital on a dark highway. I was thinking of every citizen in this state who does not wear a robe." When those cuffs tightened, McAllister told me that nobody cares about my rights once I am in his custody. He believed that because, for far too long, we have allowed men like him to believe it. He pointed directly at the defendant. He did not assault only Elijah Thornton that night. He assaulted the foundation of the public trust. If we permit officers to wield the power of the state to terrorize the innocent, then the law is no longer a shield for the righteous. It is merely a weapon for the cruel. The defense had no further questions. The jury deliberated less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. McAllister stood shaking as federal marshals cuffed him and led him away. There was no triumph in Thornton's heart, only a heavy, solemn relief. Justice had been blind that night on Route 59, but it had not been deaf. 2 days later, the Department of Justice announced a sweeping federal consent decree over the 42nd Precinct, restructuring training, oversight, and internal affairs from the ground up. Union President Michael Donnelly was forced into early retirement under a cloud of federal scrutiny. On a bright Monday morning, Justice Elijah R. Thornton walked back into the Illinois Supreme Court building. Vivian was waiting in his chambers. She helped him into the heavy black robe. He looked down at his wrists. The bruises had faded, but faint permanent scars remained where the metal had bitten deep. A constant physical reminder of how fragile justice can be and how relentlessly it must be protected. He picked up his gavel, took a steadying breath, and walked out to the bench. The fight was far from over. In truth, it had only just begun. This story stands as a stark reminder that true justice cannot exist when those sworn to enforce the law place themselves above it. Titles and connections may sometimes shield the powerful, but the moral measure of any society is how its system treats its most vulnerable citizens on a dark, rain-swept highway when no one is watching. When the blue wall finally cracks, it is courage, joined with evidence and the refusal to look away, that lets the truth break through.